Okay, we're all good.
Right. Good go.
Right. So the main focus I'm going to talk about is something that was published last week, which is the Environmental Improvement Plan. So in 2018, DEFRA published the 25 Environment Plan, which set out our vision for the environment over a quarter of a century. Part of that committed us to update every 5 years, and the Environmental Improvement Plan that was published last week represents the first update to that. It sets out a vision for what DEFRA wants to see, and a set of actions that we will take to bring about environmental improvement. And really, I think that it's interesting, kind of the structure of it is across 10 different goals. But one kind of goal, thriving plants and wildlife, is seen as the apex goal. So a lot of the driving force really is a very clear focus on nature and improving nature. I'm going to talk a bit around goals 3 and 4, so clean and plentiful water, and then managing exposure to chemicals and pesticides. And within that, I'll focus a bit more on the chemicals side of things. But there's a lot of detail within the Environmental Improvement Plan, particularly in terms of actions and things that we'll take on the water side that's well worth a read. So this is just a quick kind of infographic really on the clean and plentiful water chapter within the EIP. So you can see a number of different areas that are of relevance. So constructing new mine water treatment schemes, modernizing wastewater treatments, using nature-based solutions, facilitate infrastructure projects to reduce leakage, and incentivizing sustainable land use. So a lot of kind of different areas really covered, and it's interesting they take clean and plentiful water together, making sure the water is enough water and making sure water is clean enough. I'm not going to go into too much detail on some of the water aspects. I'm going to focus a bit more on the chemicals side of it. And so on the chemicals and pesticides chapter, there's a number of different actions that are set out in a number of different areas, both encompassing legacy pollution. So what are we doing about persistent organic pollutants and POPs, chemicals in waste, looking at tackling chemical pollution at source through regulatory action, including banning or restricting most harmful chemicals. There's also something there on pesticides, which I won't go into detail, but it's interesting for water quality as well. And also the monitoring of what do we understand our greatest risk to be, target the greatest risk with our monitoring program, and need to understand the chemicals pathways and exposure in the environment. In terms of specific commitments, I think probably the headline one is a commitment to publish a chemicals strategy in 2023 to tackle chemicals of concern. So although the EIP sets out some actions, what I've got listed here around POPs and PCBs, emissions of mercury, I think a lot of the main strategic driver on chemicals is going to come later this year when we publish the chemicals strategy. There is also down at the bottom an interesting target about reduced by half both excess nutrients, overall risk posed by pesticides and highly hazardous chemicals. This is a global target. So this came out of the Convention on Biodiversity discussions. This is target 7 under that. So again, this shows sort of a level of ambition of what we're trying to achieve, but also an international element and international focus to some of the work that we do on chemicals policy. So a little bit more on kind of the chemical strategy. What's the chemical strategy going to cover? What do we want to look at there? So a few sort of areas where the chemical strategy will set out our approach to managing priority chemical issues. So PFAS is a big one. We have restrictions on certain PFAS, so PFOS and PFOA, for example, under the Stockholm Convention. And so there's a legacy contamination issue that will need to be addressed or managed in some way. But there's also work going on through the regulatory management options analysis under UK REACH to understand the uses in the UK and inform regulatory approaches there. And there's also work, we work closely with the Environment Agency, UK Health Security Agency, and Drinking Water Inspectorate to understand the environmental risks from PFAS, the health risks from PFAS, and how PFAS affects our water and is contaminated within the environment. Endocrine disrupting chemicals, again, another issue that we'll look to set out an approach within the chemical strategy. Again, a large group of chemicals where there's some emerging risks, some more well-known risks, particularly in relation to the water environment. And really we'll look to kind of set out our approach on EDCs in a bit more detail in the upcoming strategy. Unintentional mixtures and combination effects as well. So this refers to the fact that most chemicals regulation is based on individual substances, but actually in reality, organisms are exposed to a variety of, or a number of different chemicals at different time points through their lives, and mixtures as well within that. So this is obviously a complex area of ongoing kind of scientific research, but there's questions for us on the policy side of what action could we take to look to address that risk. So that's another area that will be covered in the strategy as well. I think just to note in terms of where a lot of our evidence and a lot of the work that goes into this and helps kind of inform these policy decisions, there's monitoring, across the Environment Agency, in particular the prioritisation early warning system, which has been developed on the back of the 25-year environment plan, and it's now about taking that forward and embedding that more within our regulatory framework and using the information that comes out of PEWs effectively. We also have evidence programs, some of which are for reporting to the 25-year environment plan, such as the H4 is one of the indicators under the 25 environment plan, but it also provides a good basis to collate evidence across various different chemicals, and there's an ongoing program of work developing H4 further. Links to external evidence programs and links into the wider kind of academic research is also very important, such as programs like this. Understanding what the latest research thinking is and latest thoughts coming out of research is important. That's why I think the chemical strategy, we had a series of workshops last summer, and it was very good to see academics and researchers contributing and attending to those workshops. Likewise on mixtures, we had a workshop in December, and very pleased to see kind of those from the research community attending and contributing to those events, because we really, one of the things in the strategy is looking to be evidence-led and making sure we're making use of the best science available. And so the best science available also means international collaborations. The UK is a partner in the European Union's PARC programme. So this is a European-wide partnership on the risk assessment of chemicals, a 7-year programme. The UK has 17 partners embedded across all the different work programmes of that programme, which is the outputs from that and the research that goes in there is going to be really informative to chemicals management in the coming years. And we also have more specific sort of bilateral agreements. So the UK-Japan partnership on EDCs is now going into its 25th year. The 24th annual meeting last November was again very successful. Really interesting to hear from academics across UK and Japan, and also bringing in those from who work in regulation and those who work in policy all together to discuss some complex issues around EDCs. We also work closely with the OECD, so again contributing to the OECD and also learning from the work that goes on there as part of our international collaboration. So in terms of where are the gaps, where's our priorities for this programme? So I think there will be more to come in terms of when we set the chemical strategy in terms of our policy priorities, but really the science questions are still saying the same: to further understand which chemical substances pose the biggest risk to freshwater ecosystems and why, understanding what that risk actually entails, what is the risk to the species, what is the risk to the individual, and what is the risk to the wider system. I think also that human health is an interesting sort of point to note in there as well, trying to take a one health approach that links between the environment, exposure, contamination, and also understanding how that impacts on public health is an important factor. I've already talked about mixtures and combinations, so that's an ongoing area of science and understanding where our understanding needs to evolve further. I think a few things that more that we maybe haven't necessarily accounted for in chemicals policy to some extent and need to do more on is things around how does a changing climate impact on chemical impacts? How do we make sure that we're kind of gathering evidence to deliver and understand what the effect of different policy responses or different policy solutions may have? And again, sort of thinking again more broadly on climate change, incorporating climate change variables into chemical risk assessment. What's this mean? And thanks to my colleague Julia, who organised a workshop recently on understanding and thinking about the links between chemical pollution and climate change. So hopefully that's a very kind of whistle-stop tour of some of the strategic priorities, all framed around the environmental improvement plan. But then a bit more detail on some of the areas which we'll look to cover in the chemical strategy, and a bit of think about where our emerging evidence and emerging research needs to be to make sure that we're continually being supported by the best science to make sure that our policy interventions have the biggest impacts. So I'll stop there.